I know you're tired of this pattern. One up and three below. When you're chasing after what matters, your heart knows where to go.
Welcome to the Cosmic Heartline podcast. I am your host, Tora Troop. Cosmic Heartline is home to remembering our relationship with death through compassionate, courageous conversations that remind us of the resilience of our animal spirit. Thank you for joining me today. My guest today on the pod is Dr. Tracy Rainwaters. She is a shaman. She is an equine chiropractor. She is an animal communicator, and she is a friend. I first knew Tracy about 16 years ago when she was starting her chiropractic career. And then she and I reconnected about 3 years ago when she was doing more of the shamanic work and in the shamanic lens. She is incredible. She is fantastic at speaking, especially to our cosmic origins and our cosmic connections. And so I knew I definitely wanted to have her on the pod to talk about that. This will not be the last time that she's on the pod, but it is the first. And we speak of our cosmic connections, we speak of our cosmic origins, and she also shares about her very recent experience and the unexpected death of her beloved dog Soonie and the lessons that have come from that so far. Thank you, Tracy, for joining me. It was an absolute blast. I cannot wait for the next one, and I hope you all enjoy this incredible conversation. All right, I'm here today with Dr. Tracy Rainwaters, a friend, a mentor. We go way back too, which
We
is
go way
pretty
back.
wild. Yeah, it's pretty wild. We can chat on that because that's I've noticed a lot recently, or I've thought a lot recently about how the spirit always brings the right people forward, right? And like
Mhm.
having reconnected with you in the past, I don't know, 2-3 years or whatnot, and now being here doing this work.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just neat. But anyway, here
Yeah.
with Tracy, I'll start you off first with the question I ask everybody, which is, how do you show up in the world, and what is your relationship with death?
How do I show up in the world? Gosh, that's such a beautiful question that's packed with so much potential. I would say in this current moment, I'm trying to show up in the world in the most heart-centered way that I possibly can, which feels deeply vulnerable. It feels also exponentially sacred and um, full of constant opportunities for expansion given the current world we live in to live in a really heart-centered way. Um, I would say in my outer reality, I've worked as an equine chiropractor for 18 years, which is how we originally met.
Mm-hmm.
And I work really now I would say I'm an interspecies intuitive channel, and I feel like my life's work is really to help people understand their animals and the entirety of the animal kingdom for the depth of wisdom and beauty that they bring into our lives. And I do that through my form of animal communication, which call soul channeling, because I feel like my expertise is channeling the higher wisdom of the soul, of the animals and the spirit world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, my relationship with death is constantly, I feel like this work of channeling souls and helping people really connect to their animals has taken me on a journey with death that I didn't really see coming when I started this work, but it's been beautiful, scary at times. It's deeply vulnerable, but it is forever changing and expanding how I view how we live in our day-to-day life now and what is possible beyond. And I would say in so many ways, it's created so much safety. Like as I deepen my relationship with death, I have so much more, like a deeper sense of safety in my own physical body and how I'm living my life earthside at this
Mm.
moment.
I love
So,
that. That's
yes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess should we dive in a little bit or chat briefly about how we do know each other? Because I think, and
Yeah.
I can't remember. I think I might have texted you this like a week or two ago. I found an old memo checkbook
Yeah.
from my college days, which would have been 20. I think the dates were actually like 2009,
Hmm.
2010, and there were like it was board checks for the horses and then checks for you for body work with Sky. So I mean that's how I remember it. Is I was connected with you through your chiropractic work for my mare's
Hmm.
guy, who's now almost 21. At the time,
Yeah.
she would have been, let's see, nine, no, 5 or 6.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you had said most of the time, which I hadn't remembered, most of the time I was at school, I was working, so you
Yeah.
didn't really see me, but you knew my horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was so early in my career too, because that would have been kind of my second into my third year of being in practice. And what I think is so wild is like when I think back, I don't even know if we had actually met. I'm like, I'm sure we might have at one point. I'm sure we did, but yeah, most of the time you were at school.
Yeah.
So, Nancy, I think that was the barn owner, was usually
Hmm.
there kind of organizing everything. And I just remember, I mean, to me, like in my awareness, kind of reconnecting through Instagram. And I don't know, in a way, it feels totally fine to say this now. I just felt like I had known you for forever. But when in reality, I'm like, we kind of really didn't know each other,
Yeah.
in a deep way. And it's just sort of grown as I've been so lucky to have you in some of my classes, and you've been up here when Lockie came to teach a clinic. And yeah, I don't know, you just feel like a soul friend. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree. The feeling's mutual. I think it was,
yeah.
yeah. And I remember I remember at least one appointment that I was there for, but then
Mhm.
and I remember at some point in those first few years, somebody mentioning that you were also kind of exploring shamanic work.
Mhm.
And I don't know when that would have been in your time frame, but I remember hearing that then, and that was before my kind of
Yeah.
initiation with shamanism, right? So I remember just kind of be like, oh, that's cool,
Yeah.
and then not really knowing much or thinking much of it. But then, of course, reconnecting now mostly in that realm or in that
Mhm.
worldview. Um,
Yeah.
it's just been neat,
Yeah, it's
it's
been
great.
fun. It's
It's great
wild.
how these things work. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
totally.
So I would love to dive into a little bit because one of the things I love about what you do is, and the way you speak of things is how you draw in connection to the cosmos and
Hmm.
that kind of universal connection that we all have and that we all come from.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd love to start there and like
Yeah.
kind of dive into that.
It's my favorite part about what I do. And I think so much of it stems from I was like a closeted spiritualist for a really long time. And by that, I just mean I wasn't raised in a family where this was considered normal or encouraged or really understood in any real way.
Hmm.
And throughout so much of my 20s, I was quietly just curious about, angels and spirit guides and all of these things. And had gone to intuitives a couple times and had had great experiences. So I feel like I kind of came into this life. I remember being 3 years old and like sitting in the back of my parents' car and having this what felt like a very deep understanding of like, oh, I've been alive like many times and I'm back. And it was kind of like, oh God, I'm back. Like I have to like, I
Oh
remember
no,
thinking
I'm
like,
here.
oh, yeah, like, oh God. And it was more of like, oh, I have to go through like this whole process of like being a kid and being a teenager and growing up. And I just wanted to skip to the grown up, like the good part. And I was kind of an atypical kid in that way. Like I just really didn't resonate with kids. I don't know. Like my grandma said, she was like, you were kind of just born 30 years old. So
Hmm.
I feel like from a very young age, I had this expanded sense of like, there's so much more to us than just this life in this physical body. So after I went through my shamanic training, I mean, it was 2011 when I had my first experience with a shaman. And that's when my life kind of came into clear focus and I understood my sensitivity, my viewpoint of the world, how I felt about animals. I feel like the entirety of my life, it never occurred to me that they couldn't communicate or that they weren't deeply intelligent and that they didn't have a lot to offer. So it felt really abrasive to kind of be in the world, as I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can understand, and to not understand why people didn't experience the world the way that I did. So going
Yes.
through my shamanic training, like kind of helped me understand why I was the way that I was. And for me, that was really, even though like we didn't learn how to communicate with animals, that was the touchstone for at least tapping into my intuition and developing that connection. What very quickly started to happen as I brought intention into, communicating with animals that way. And this is where I see the bridge to shamanism. I mean, they started showing me, I go out on a chiropractic appointment and people are not having me out for animal communication. They're not having me out for shamanic work. But I would start to see, the animals would say like, yeah, I've got, just going to use an example, like a lameness in the right hind leg, but there's like a huge emotional component and it's actually rooted in the human.
Mm,
So it became like this interesting complex of like, well, that's fascinating, but also it's also a very awkward thing. And I just really felt like, how do you, not everybody's open to hearing that. So it just
sure.
created this feeling of some false identity a little bit within my work. But as I, stepped into doing this work and just really opening, um, I had this experience with one of my cats of laying on my bed, and I've been having pain in my knee that kind of came out of nowhere. Long story short, I couldn't really resolve it, and there was no injury or anything like that. And it was Bowie, who you've met,
Mm, mm-hmm.
actually got on me, which he doesn't usually do. And I was in that in between state of like half awake and half asleep.
Mm,
And he took me inside of my body, and I saw the entirety of the inside of my body as a solar system,
mm,
like seeing my heart as its own galaxy. And he took me like very quickly, like down into my knee, and I saw like all of these flashes of these images of just events and things and feelings and emotions, and it happened so quickly I couldn't even process what each individual one was, but it probably happened in a microsecond.
right.
And then I woke up, or I like kind of came back to, and like my knee has never hurt since.
Huh.
So that, I mean, amongst other things, was like one of these really amazing experiences of like, we are so much more than what we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
And then just being open to the question of, when I channel with an animal, it's like, well, where does your soul come from? Like when we really think of our animals as being ensouled and having deep wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and access to universal intelligence, it's like most animals are connected to every physical body that they've ever had. I mean, they can tell you about other lifetimes. And for them, I mean, they've shared with me, they were like, for humans, at some point, you guys will get to this point where you can remember, every experience that you've had. But for animals, it's just a perspective shift.
Mm,
It's not a big mind leap into something else. So just starting to ask the questions, it's like, okay, well, who were you as a soul before you came here on planet Earth? And having them share information, like if we look at the collective consciousness of specific species, they are rooted in different star systems in the cosmos with an intense, like with an intentional purpose of
mm-hmm.
flowing wisdom here into the earth and into the hearts of humanity. So for me, it's like I've always felt animals, I've never seen them as not my equals. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, we have to steward them, have to, make decisions on their behalf, but like in my heart, their wisdom, their intelligence, their consciousness is at the bare minimum equal to us and sometimes greater.
Yes.
Um, and what they're able to access. And, to me, like what animals have shown, it's like they're bringing this higher dimensional, higher frequency wisdom and anchoring it here into the grids of consciousness and the, that exist in the earth and that flow through every living thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these high spiritual gifts. They have a deep, like every species has an intention and a purpose and a reason for being here. Which what I feel like when we open our hearts and our minds to that, in so many ways, it's like I can never view animals the same way. It forever shifts the way that you engage with them, and
Yes.
how I see them and what they're actually here doing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I love, first of all, I love like you feeling like you were born 30 years old. I felt the
Yeah.
exact same way my entire
Yeah.
life. It is like
Yeah.
I've always connected stronger with people older than me. It's just like you know,
Yeah.
yeah, totally relate to that. And yeah, I love, I mean, the cosmic connections, I feel like I myself have begun to understand both through working with you, right? Like
Yeah.
with my own
Yeah.
animals and learning from you as well, but then even it's been fascinating for me to reflect on it from the perspective of the shift and connection that I have now with Bay, whom
Hmm.
I speak of often. The
Yeah.
first episode of this podcast focuses on that because he's the reason that I ended up here doing this, right?
Yeah.
I think you even referenced, and this is a thread that everybody that I've talked to so far has of we don't really choose to build this type of relationship with death, but it comes with the territory.
Yes,
Like
100%.
it is something that we are led to through stewarding our animals and
Yeah.
through building our lives with them, right?
Hmm.
Um, but there's in the best that I can describe it with him, and I'd love then to chat a little bit because you've done in one of the sessions he came forward along with Harley and
Hmm.
Riser, so I'd love to chat about that briefly. But
Yeah.
he, it's just there's just such a clear energy signature, for lack of a better phrase,
Hmm.
of him still present, right? And
Yes.
every time I feel it, or every time it's palpable in a really profound way, it is him in the cosmos. Like there's no doubt about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes he comes down and I can like feel kind of, it's that feeling of like out of the corner of your eye, you kind of catch
Hmm.
an energy, right? So like sometimes he's a bit more present here in this earth realm, but the
Yeah.
large majority of the time it's there in those cosmos. So I
Yeah.
mean, given that we've had or given it's a session that you did with me, I'd love to dive a little bit with that since it's my own animals of like
Yeah.
meaning, um, privacy wise, obviously it's fine. Of like, if I recall correctly, I think you said that they shared that he and Harley, who's a mare that I had who passed,
Hmm.
and Riser, who's a mare that I have now, are all from Antares,
Hmm.
if I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah.
And the physical expression of kind of my own heart, like
Hmm.
connection and desires.
Yeah.
Um, I'd love it to. Is there more you can share or dive into on that? Again, I know this is kind of off the cuff here for you, but
Yeah.
yeah, you'll explain
Um,
it better than I can, is basically what
well,
I'm.
yeah. So to kind of help people understand, like if we think of like all of the different star systems and the planets that exist out in the cosmos, you know, on one hand, okay, well, first we actually have to go back to understanding like different dimensional states of reality. So, somewhere here, well, most of us here on Earth are operating somewhere between like a third dimensional and a fifth dimensional reality. So, when we think of a third dimensional reality, it is duality. So, it is me versus you. It's very tribal, it's black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I mean, there's beauty and horror in that, like, and everything in between. And as we start to move up in vibratory frequency, there's been, indigenous cultures have been talking about for millennia that we're moving into this new era, which on one hand, we could say humanity is evolving our consciousness so that we can walk and work in the world. We can come up and out of this third dimensional reality, which is full of conflict, into a fifth dimensional reality, which is very participatory, it's very communal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's more about harmony and connection and how can we work together. So
Mm-hmm.
that is this evolutionary leap that humans in our consciousness, that we're literally like straddling two worlds right now, and it
Mm-hmm.
feels messy and hard, I think, for everybody regardless of your viewpoints. Like,
Yes.
it's a very challenging time to be alive right now. So there are, we could call them star seeds, star beings. To me, they're like, yes, they're an actual consciousness that exists in these different planetary realms. Now, to me, like the way I would describe it, they're, vibrating at a dimensional frequency that is so far above what, a human can see with their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, we could go to the planet Arcturus or, Antares, and it's just going to look like a planet, but there is a consciousness that is rooted there of these different star systems. So when we think of like how a species is created. So again, for anybody listening to this, I encourage you just to soften your heart and your mind and just take in and let
Mm-hmm.
this settle wherever it wants to settle. But if we think of Earth being created and the planet herself, as we would call her Gaia, there is a consciousness to this Earth in and of
Yes.
itself. Humans are not the only conscious beings, or at least this is the way I view everything. So I look at all of nature, all of the plants and the animals are an extension of that heartfelt consciousness of this earth.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually say the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, like they are an expression of the heart of Gaia, but they are also being infused by higher dimensional frequencies that come from different places in the cosmos. So typically, like when I look at horses, the collective consciousness of horses, they're actually very rooted in the angelic realms. So they're
Mm-hmm.
deeply connected to what I would call the creator beings, and helping not only create all of the physical things that we see here on the planet, but also creating consciousness itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I see that, it's like through these glowing grids of energy that exist in the earth, they exist in the trees, the plants, the animals, the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could think of, horses kind of coming from this angelic realm, which is very much related to Arcturus, and the Arcturians, which they're related to the angelics, and they are kind of what have helped create the universe or the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think of the collective wisdom that horses tap into beyond their individual self, like beyond their soul, they can flow, this angelic high vibrational cosmic wisdom through their bodies and anchor it down here on the planet Earth,
Mm-hmm.
which to me is what makes horses so magical. I mean, they really are a mediator between the cosmos and the Earth. Horses have this beautiful ability to connect very deeply to the Earth as well. So they can hold these heaven and earth energies and can liberate within us some of the deepest wounds that we have, which to me is like a
Mm-hmm.
very earthly component of how do we open. And then they hold this high cosmic vibration, which can shine the light on, in a metaphorical sense, we could say the darkness that we hold within or the shadow that exists within us. So
Right.
once we shine a light on the darkness, we make it conscious. And that's where, like, as Carl Jung would say, like, that's where the gold exists.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, when I do these cosmic origin sessions for people and their animals, or when this information comes forward, what I'm really asking is like, what is your soul signature and what is your dance through the cosmos before you've come here into physical form? So, what I will typically see, like as you experience, you will see like this clustering of like a human and their animals are often their heart is connected to a primary source in the cosmos, and they're bringing that energy, they're flowing
Mm-hmm.
that energy from their hearts and their consciousness here on earth, and it's really meant to be for the betterment of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
um and what I'm beginning to see too, like, and what I would guess would be very true for you and Bay, and what was your original mare's name?
Harley.
Harley.
Yep.
um what I see in people too is, sometimes these animals that are so near and dear to us and that act as like these amazing stewards and guides for us in our life, that it can almost feel more like a parent than
Mm-hmm.
our own parents do, or a support system that goes bigger and deeper beyond that. um Often we can be, when I say the child of, I really want to liberate us from our human sense, but sometimes like our animals can be born from an expression of like the heart of
Mm-hmm.
our soulless essence. Like we can actually create, these other souls as an offshoot of us, and the animals can do the same for us. So we can
Mm-hmm.
actually, in a multidimensional sense, have beings come through us. It's like a very expanded way of looking at it, but it's why to me animals feel, and the loss of an animal can feel sometimes far more triggering, or can drop us into a state of grief that sometimes can feel worse than losing like a loved one that's human.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, our hearts, that connection, that sometimes like we're all coming from that same soul essence, and it like that connection can just feel so deep and so melded, and the loss of that in physical form can be devastating.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's one of those things that to me feels, I mean, at first it can feel a little bit like um challenging isn't quite the right word, but at first it can feel a little out there, for lack of a better
Oh
phrase,
yeah,
right?
I mean, a lot out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
But then like the more time that I've spent with this worldview and like in this
mhm.
realm, and in the scheme of things I'm still a baby in it, right? But like in
Yeah,
the more time that I've spent in it, the more resonant it feels, the more logical it actually
yeah.
is for me, because of exactly what you speak of, like the depth of connection. And there's a quality of knowingness with each other, I think, that comes through
Mhm.
like right off the bat. I mean, I remember that with Bay in particular, and like he chose me, and it was a very clear, like, he wasn't on my radar when I went to go meet his litter, right? And then it was a very clear,
Mhm.
like, no, hi, how are you? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
See
hi.
me.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, we do know each other, right? And then even with Riser being born, and this is a story I want to dive in to at some point in a later episode, because the
Mhm.
day that she was born is the day that I planned Bay's euthanasia and his
Oh,
transition.
wow.
So like
Okay.
he had already let me know, I think a few weeks before that he was ready, right? Um, but the day that Riser ended up being born is the day that I was at work at the vet hospital I was working at the time, planning it with my dear friend and vet. Um,
Hmm.
and so like that was such a like cataclysmic experience of life and death,
Hmm.
literally morning and evening, and again feeling this potency of this new creature that was being born
Yeah.
coming in from my beloved Mare Sky, who, I've had since she was born as well. So like deep connection there already. But there was that same level of like souls saying hello to each other and like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, hi, you're here again, and
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
you're brand new, it's nice to meet you. It was a, oh, there you are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think from my understanding, your experience with your dog Soonie, whom unfortunately you
Hmm.
just recently
Yeah.
she just transitioned suddenly, but my understanding is it's a fairly similar experience with her, if you'd like to speak to that.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I didn't want a dog. I mean, and I say that now because looking back, to me, it kind of feeds into the story, just in that I've always felt like my life was very full and like I fully acknowledge like having a puppy and having a dog. It's so much more actually, I think the relationship is so infused in your heart and it just requires a lot where I feel like the horses and the cats that I've primarily had as an adult, like yes, you have to water and nurture those relationships absolutely, but I kind of feel like horses when they have a healthy herd, you can kind of dip in and out.
Hmm.
And cats as well. It's like when they're happy, they're okay with a little bit of separation in space. And to me, dogs have always felt very different. So it always just kind of felt like there's just never been a time in my adult life where I felt, and I had tried a couple times and it just, for a couple different reasons, like really didn't work out.
Hmm.
So I had always, and now in hindsight, I'm like, my heart had just been kind of closed down to that. I just was a little afraid of like how much that could stretch my heart. So you've been to our property. One of
Hmm.
our neighbors who literally just lives like right up the road. They had actually, it's in 2023, they had had two litters of puppies. Like the first one was very intentional and they were trying to give Darius, my husband, and I a puppy. And he and I were both like, no, 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 no. Like we don't want a puppy. So later that year, November of 2023, they had an accidental litter of puppies. And I remember going to see them when they were like a week old.
Hmm.
And I remember feeling, I'm like, oh, we're gonna get a puppy. And I was kind of like, oh no. Like, and just from the sense of like, because I've been telling actually my husband, like, no, I don't want a dog. I don't want a dog for years. So being the kind heart that he is, he was just like, all right, well, we're just not gonna have a dog. So when I
Hmm.
came to him and I'm like, I think we're supposed to have one of those puppies. He was like, no, like we're not doing a dog thing. And he also had a lot of things going on with his career. He was studying for a big exam. I mean, it truly could not have been like a less ideal time for us to
Hmm.
get a dog. So anyway, we kind of crossed over the threshold into 2024 and our neighbor like went through a really traumatic surgery and they kind of ended up with these puppies and she just wasn't available to like get them out there and get them rehomed. So they had kind of stayed until they were like 12 to 14 weeks old. And I was walking out to take my trash cans out and our driveway's like a quarter of a mile long. So it's like quite a long haul. And I see one of their adult dogs and two puppies like romping around one of our front pastures, which is adorable. And so I like walk out our front gate and all of these puppies just start spilling out from underneath their fence line and
Oh my
they're
gosh.
like running around. So anyway, I go to walk these dogs back to our neighbors and the puppy, the Soonie, like
Hmm.
the rest of them kind of took off up the hill up the driveway to go back home and she kind of hung out with me and like just sort of stayed.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, that's okay. Well, that's kind of interesting. And I just kind of like kept trying to get her to go back home. And she kind of would like go and then come back. And like that alighted something in my heart where I'm like, oh, it's you.
Hmm.
Like, okay.
Hmm.
It then took a little bit of convincing with my husband. And it was more just the logistics of like, with his work schedule and how much he was studying, it was like, how are we going to do this and how are we going to make it work? We end up bringing her home and what I think is funny is my husband's pretty resistant. He ends up falling madly and deeply in love with this dog. Like on day three, he's
That's
like
always how
hugging.
it works.
Yeah, he's like hugging her in the driveway, and I kind of walked by and I just heard him whisper, like, "I love you so much."
Oh.
It was so sweet. Um, and she, you know, like she was just extraordinary. I don't, yes, like there were really challenging times.
Sure.
And this is like where I hope, like, I actually, now that she's gone, then I'll speak of that experience in a minute. Like, I can't really attach myself to any guilt anymore. It's like that thread is just not even accessible.
Mm.
But she was a blue heeler and an Australian Shepherd. And like, I mean, she was a phenomenal farm dog, but they are like independent thinkers. So, the early months were just challenging, and adopting to life. But she was just a great, great dog and like very, very happy. And she started having seizures. Well, it was like right before, well, the first one that I saw was like right, like 2 weeks before her first birthday.
Mm.
And to make a long and convoluted story very short, that was like the middle of November. And then on January 31st, she had a cluster of grand mal seizures.
Mm.
Like she had five back to back. We took her to the emergency vet, and it actually took them like a day and a half to stop the seizure cycle, which is pretty extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But we came home, with medication and really hopeful that we would be able, I mean, the hope was just really like, can we manage this with medication and just give her a very high quality life? And we had 3 amazing weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Where, I mean, truly, like, it took her about 24 hours after she came home from being hospitalized, and she was kind of back to, I don't know, it just felt like it went back to life as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And, uh, and then like 3 weeks later, it was in the morning and I had just fed her and given her a medication. And like 30 minutes later, she had a seizure, and she just, like, again, took her to the emergency vet right away. And we just couldn't, she ended up, things escalated and got very bad very quickly. And I just found myself, in that heartbreaking situation where I've got a young dog
Mm-hmm.
who, Darius and I talked about it a lot, and we were both very clear that the quality of her life was far more important than the quantity of her
Mm-hmm.
life. And with the amount of seizures she was having, they were starting to worry about brain damage
Mm-hmm.
and other long-term side effects. And I actually had like tried to get her home, and I, like, being in the car was so stressful, like that kept throwing her into like many like seizure cycles. So,
Mm.
we decided to humanely let her go, which um, it's the first time I've had to make a decision like that on an animal's behalf where like I truly didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to get her home from the emergency vet, and I made it halfway home, and she started having seizures, and I like got off the freeway, and I was ironically right in front of another emergency vet that was already at capacity. But my husband was at work, and I was like calling, all the professionals, anyone I could think of, to kind of be like, what do I do? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do we keep going, or like, where is the line of no return? And it's the first time I've been paralyzed by that decision of like, my heart didn't want to let go. And yet I also knew that I'm like, I don't think we come back from this. And
Mm-hmm.
even when she had her, like, the first big hospitalization for her seizures in January, like, when I woke up the next day, because the vets were like, we want to see her go 24 hours without a seizure before, we release her. And when I woke up the next day, they had called and said that she had had a bunch of seizures throughout the night. And I even told my husband then, I'm like, I don't feel good about that. Like, I don't think that there's like a great outcome here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's so, and the vets were amazing. I'm really grateful I was able to bring her home. She's buried here on our property, but it it shook me to my core because
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that feeling of like, I don't think either one of us felt like we were done. And this
Mm-hmm.
felt like not just, it was like running into a concrete wall of like, this feels really unfair. I didn't feel like this was supposed to happen. Um, If I had unlimited financial resources, yes, there's more we could have done. I don't think it would have changed the outcome like
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. Um, and it took me into, I have never allowed myself, and I think this is maybe important for people to know, like I've never allowed myself to grieve to the point of sobbing and actually being completely incapacitated for 4 days
Mm-hmm.
of feeling like I was not available for anything. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the most dysregulating things and one of the hardest things was like I couldn't feel her.
As animal guardians, we know the day will come when we must walk our beloved animal through their death transition, and stewarding them on this journey requires us to put our own hearts aside so we can act with their best interests at the forefront. That doesn't mean you have to navigate these waters alone. As a shamanic animal death doula, I am here to support you and your animal in this transition. Cosmic Heartline offers compassionate conversation, resource investigation, advanced care planning, shamanic ceremony, and grief support, regardless of where you are in the world and where you are on this journey with your animal. For more information and to book services, go to www.cosmicheartline.com and enter promo code POD for $5 off your first session. And now, back to the podcast.
Like I couldn't feel her around me. It was like the grief was so big
Mm-hmm.
and the experience was so big that I think it's probably like in hindsight, like as I talk about it, like um it's one of like the most profound experiences of just being really present, where it's like nothing else exists but where I am in this moment and how I feel in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've actually never surrendered enough, I think, in a grief state to allow myself just to be there. And in hindsight, it's like I've never allowed myself to take a week off of work, when
Mm-hmm.
I've been in a state like this and just literally put everything on hold just to be present to dancing with this grief and like really being with it. And I can understand why this is so scary. And I mean, if I'm being brutally honest, like, yes, I've grieved deeply. I've had extraordinary experiences with my own animals once they've passed on, but like being in such a deep state of shock and
Mm-hmm.
grief,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's actually huge medicine in that because what came on the flip side of that, and you and I have talked about this, I really, from my own experience, I'm like grief and joy to me are like a teeter totter, like they exist on a spectrum.
Absolutely.
And joy is something I've actually had a really hard time connecting to in this life. Like I cognitively understand what joy is, but I can't say I've walked through life with just unbridled joy. Like, yes,
Mm-hmm.
I've been happy, I've been full of gratitude, and I've touched on joy. But in this experience of losing her, like allowing me to literally free fall into grief,
Mm-hmm.
what I'm also feeling is states of joy, which feel weird, like on the heels of losing a being that you love so deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Once I crossed that threshold, and I will say, like, you were extraordinary. Like, you and I had been talking about death, I think, like, oh, like literally a week or two before she died. And we were talking about, like, kind of having this runway of, like, knowing when an animal's going to go and, like, how do we make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
And I think some part of me may have known because I was kind of like, yeah, and I also feel for the people when it's like a shock, and
Absolutely.
then to
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
myself in that shock state. Um, but you were so wonderful at checking in. And I reached out to, there's an animal communicator that I work with when I feel really blocked with my own animals. And she did a session with her
Mm-hmm.
after she passed on. And I would say to anyone who's open to that, whoever you have to reach out to, it gave me that sense of like it liberated me from the guilt and it
Mm-hmm.
allowed the grief to actually move in a way that I have these moments of feeling like deep abundant joy, like I can feel her around me again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And much like you said, it's like this presence, like sometimes I'll be walking around the farm and it's like I just feel her run up to me and it's like she's just right there.
Yeah.
um which is such an extraordinary experience. But through this, like now that I can communicate with her and feel her, she's taken me on this journey of like, she and I, and again, this may be really out there for a lot of people, but it's like on a energetic and a soul level, it's like we're existing in another realm, still walking side by side. And she kind of described it as like a mismanagement of her own energy of sort of bouncing between different realms. And that
Mm.
was, from her perspective, part of the seizures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it kind of fried her energetic circuits, but I feel like too, like she and I have been able to have this experience of like, I would love to have her back,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like I still need time and kind of renegotiating of like, and maybe we pick a different body that can sort of handle,
Right.
the energy that you hold and maybe some different genetics,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been deeply, deeply expansive and it's a weird place to be in too, because it's like I would move a mountain to have her back. And
Yeah.
yet I feel like what is opening and what she's teaching me and what I'm beginning to understand, I'm like, there's so much beauty in that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that it's a weird place to be like, her death was an initiation of sorts. And it's
Absolutely.
horrible when you're in it. Like, it's
Yeah.
horrible. But this is this shamanic principle of like, we really can't grow without these initiatory experiences, like not just on a spiritual level, but even on a psychological sense, like we need to be challenged in these ways. And that's how I view death. Like it's expansive, it's sacred, it's initiatory,
Mm-hmm.
it's brutal, like it's gut
Mm-hmm.
wrenching, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also beautiful and joyful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that connection with joy is so potent. I mean, I say often now that part of what I'm learning that I love, like why I love this work or having these
Hmm.
conversations is because it's precisely because it reminds me of what it is to be alive, right? And like
Yes.
it allows, even in just conversing about it or thinking about it in whatever realm, it allows that purer connection to joy,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that recognition of, oh, like it is actually a huge gift to be alive and to
Yeah.
get to share space with these creatures. And
Yeah.
absolutely, it's absolutely devastating when
Yeah.
when they go, whether it's expected or not, but especially when it's not. Um, I'd love a little bit to touch on, because in my experience there is an additional layer of kind of that mental game of whether it's the
Hmm.
guilt or even just the grief, right? When it is a younger
Yeah.
animal. I mean, she was
Hmm.
just over 1. Bay was 4
Hmm.
when he died.
Hmm.
There's, and on the one hand, logically, I've always kind of said and known, there's no guarantee. Who
Hmm.
knows, right? We're never given a set guarantee of time with anything. And yet, when
Yeah.
they are so young,
Yeah.
there's a different layer to it, right? I mean, how
It
did
hits
you
different.
experience that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I what I was immediately thrown into was this rage. Like it
Mm.
was actual rage at the universe of like, this is really unfair.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I can look back on, I'm like, well, isn't that an interesting thing to like look at and expand and let go of? Because
Mm.
again, it's like I've really walked throughout the world thinking, well, if I'm a really good person, therefore good things will happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was really raised, I remember my parents saying like we should treat people the way you want to be treated, which I still 100% live by,
Yes.
and I do believe that to be true. But I felt like what my brain kind of took in was if I do the right things and if I have integrity and morals and values, like the universe will reward that and therefore like somehow I'll be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's true, maybe it's not, I don't know. But for me, like that experience of like really looking at of like, oh, I have a lot of anger actually around things being unfair.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in the world to me that feels very unfair.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's a reminder. I actually had a shaman tell me this. They were like, nothing in nature is actually rooted in fairness.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at how like the cycles of nature and how animals coexist and survive, It's not really about being fair, but it is about balance. And I don't know why, but like having that awareness kind of helped that it's like, it's important for me too to exist as a balanced human being and to not always meld myself into this perfect ideal so that I can feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a lot, there was just a lot there for me to really look at. Um, and yeah, like anytime that I've done like breath work. I did ayahuasca like one time,
Mm-hmm.
where you're kind of in this experience of literally, to me, merging with the cosmos. Like the thing that my consistent thread is always this message of like being in a physical body on this planet is such a gift. Like being alive is such a gift. And it's the one thing that I would say walking through my life, I can get really disconnected from pretty easily of what a privilege and what a gift it
Mm-hmm.
is to be alive. Um, so yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of taking a detour here, but yeah, like losing an animal young hurts. It just feels unfair. And
Mm-hmm.
what I try to, or at least with Soonie, like what I've really tried to hold on to, and I feel like this is to me like a way of honoring the animals of like everything has its own soul's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And what a privilege for us to like dance together,
Mm-hmm.
in our time together. And I feel like I have to trust that she came here to experience, everything that she needed or wanted to experience. Like we loved her fiercely. Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like she had a darn good life, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but it hurts. It's just a different type of hurt. I think it's such a death has been easier for me to handle with the older animals where I can look back and I'm like, even if life wasn't perfect, I knew at the end or for whatever duration they were with me, they were loved, they were
Mm-hmm.
valued, they
Mm-hmm.
had as best a species appropriate life that I could give them or that was available to them. And like that grief is still there and it's still deeply sad and like the loss of their physical presence is there, but to me it wasn't like the knife in the heart
Mm-hmm.
that losing a being that just feels really young.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I appreciate that you brought in anger because that I think that's that I feel like is one of the it's of course it's a completely normal aspect of grief. I feel like
mhm,
it's one of the ones that's the most challenging
yeah.
because it can be I experienced a similar thing after Bay died. There was intense anger that now looking back I can see was also tied to because he was the fifth in this string of deaths that I
Hmm.
had experienced over about 11 years, right? So,
Yeah.
like, it wasn't just his death, it was all of the ones before as well, right?
Hmm.
But to your point of we don't often either take the time to really just collapse
Yeah.
into grief, right? There's kind of this mindset of, well, but whether it's societal or even internal, of like, no, we just got to keep going and like, just pick up and like have a moment and then carry on and not
Mhm.
giving the full like giving grief the room essentially, right? And saying like,
Yeah.
all right, let's spend some time together here.
Well, it
And
also like has shown me how uncomfortable. I mean, and I feel like this
mm,
isn't new information, but how uncomfortable deep grief
yeah.
really makes people. Um, I feel like what it did for my husband and I, it's the first, like we've lost grandparents in our time together in our relationship, but to me, this is like the first big grief that we've walked through together where I feel like it hit us the same.
Mm-hmm.
It was the same experience. And I feel like it deepened our relationship in a way that that feels like a gift.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really surprised at, with like my parents and my in-laws and like the way it's like people can see you in this deep state and how much people like want to brace against it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's one of those things where I've also experienced this incredible like I had this feeling of like I needed to share a little bit her experience of her seizures and her passing online. And again, it's the first time I've done this where it was like I did it because I'm like, I actually feel like I need support. Like this is big and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what to do. And I feel like all of these people, some of them that I only know through the digital space, like we've never had a conversation, we've never met face to face, like the amount of love and support and just general sense of like, I see you in this
Mm,
moment and I see what you're going through means so much. And then to have people really close to me, like really downplay and sort of be like, just, yeah, well, you did the right thing.
yeah.
Life goes
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is why I think it's so important to have these conversations. Like to me, like nobody escapes this life without dancing with grief. And we can either
Hmm.
choose to suppress it or you can really be with it. And I feel like, yeah, like this has taken me on an experience of like, I understand how horrible and how scary this is, but this is like vital for every positive emotion that we have in life is to be able to sit in this deep, dark space and
Hmm.
actually be transformed by it.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yeah.
wish I could kind of give people this experience of like, yes, it's horrible, but there's also beauty on the other side of it. The amount of love that you're going to be able to feel and experience on the other side of this is like 10x what you think you can do now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it does, if one is open to it, I think it does open the door to a deeper understanding and connection to those that have departed and the cosmos, right? I mean, like I
Yeah.
think, and for those listening, I can understand if that feels like, wait, how does that happen? And I can't even really explain how it happens. It just has, right? I mean, it's
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
for me, it's like, and it's not just because I'm an animal communicator.
right.
I feel like what it has given me, it's like being able to feel my animals that have passed on and to have these experiences. It's not all day, every day, but to have them
Right.
kind of come in, it's reconfirmed that my belief system of that, like, this body is temporary, but who I am will go on. Like, it's given me such a confidence in that,
Hmm.
which to me feels deeply grounding instead
Hmm.
of feeling like I'm walking through life and this is really hard and who knows what's at the end of it. And I don't know, like it's anchored something in me where it's like I have more trust in my soul and my place in the cosmos. It's given me like this unfolding sense of like I am loved and supported. Like there are
Hmm.
these energetic beings that exist beyond physical form. Like I've always felt that and known that, but to me it deepens it. And there's like a
Hmm.
trust that comes in. Um and I feel like, yeah, there are these moments of touching on something that's so much bigger than us that puts us in awe and wonder. And I'm like, don't we all need more of that?
Yes. Yes. Especially now, right? If ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's been a
Absolutely.
beautiful experience too. I don't know if you've gone through this, but I was even telling my husband the other day, like the way all of my other animals have sort of shown up is palpably different.
I was going to ask you about that, like what your experience with that has been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the kitties, which for anyone who knows me a little bit, I mean, my cats are really like my allies. And, Toots is very gregarious and outgoing. And he and my husband have like a special thing going on. But some of his, like, he's kind of returned to, there are some things that he does that are very, I feel like his way of really nurturing me, which is like sleeping on my feet at night.
Mm.
He's been like around me and it's like his whole being has softened and opened. And I feel like he's very much kind of just around me, just it's offering love and support, but he's kind of like offering me this constant of like, are you okay? Like I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like even the horses, like everything softened. And I can only describe it is I feel like our engagement no longer went from me trying to care for them, but it's like they opened and I just had this feeling of like, no, we're here for you.
Mm.
And like the softness and the cheekiness and the playfulness kind of opened in a different way that I could receive, but was really gentle. It's like they've all kind of risen to the occasion, and I no longer feel like I'm having to steward them. It feels more like the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
being held by the herd in the
Hmm.
moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. It's the way that other animals respond to, I think is that's a whole other like a topic to dive into at some point of like how, because I think they can also be great examples, right? Or like even
Hmm.
just the supports, right? It's like they can soften, they can do. I've noticed, you and I have spoken that if Phoenix, my old girl, is in her window to some
Yeah.
capacity, and who knows how long this window will end up being, but But I've noticed more and more my cat Silas, who
Mhm.
he's always enjoyed the dogs. He always kind of greets them. But I've noticed that more and more he makes a point of going up to Phoenix and rubbing against her or laying next to her or spending time
Yeah.
with her almost any time that they cross paths because he's in and out during the day. So like almost any time, especially in the evenings, especially in the mornings. But
Hmm.
and noticing those little things, even the horses are softening towards her in a way
Yeah.
that they're always respectful of the dogs, but also sometimes like, you guys can leave the
Yeah.
space. But
Get out of
even with
here.
her, yeah. But with her, they're, they kind of will sometimes have that energy, but it's much softer, right? Like you can tell that
Mhm.
they understand, like, okay, we got to give her the time to move or shift, or they just don't care, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I think our the animals remaining can also be these huge reminders and guides for um, softening to the entire process
Yeah.
of death and on both ends of it, right?
Yeah.
And reminding us kind of be here and be present with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned too a little bit of the soul contract that
Mhm.
seems to have come forward with Soonie. Would you mind speaking on that just a little bit, especially for folks?
Yeah.
What does that even mean, right? We've touched on it somewhat, but then, and what have you experienced since her passing?
Yeah, so like to me, I just look at soul contracts or soul agreements. I feel like we can have a soul contract with ourselves, which are these sacred agreements to have certain experiences in life or things that, we want to give to the world or receive, all of that. And then we can obviously have these agreements with other beings. And I feel like prior to her passing, I had always sort of held this belief that, yes, like we can obviously change a soul contract. And this may be a conversation for another time, but my mare Sidera went in for surgery as a 2-year-old. And afterwards, she was like, well, I got here on Earth and it was way different than what I thought it was going to be. So I had to rearrange some contracts. So, like,
Hmm.
there was something in being anesthetized that made that very easy for her. But that's like
Hmm.
a whole other conversation.
Love it.
But I've always kind of had this feeling of like that they were more concrete than I guess they are. This feeling of like, well, there's like a certain intention to live a certain amount of time, and that I guess if you wanted out of that, you could. But losing Suni, it was definitely this feeling of she was like, no, like it was a shock to me too. Like she
Mm-hmm.
didn't feel done. Like her contract hadn't expired. She
Mm-hmm.
wasn't ready to go. But her physical form, wasn't really capable of supporting her energetic body and kind of being in the world that the way that she was. Um, so yeah, it's just like again, talk about like an experience that sort of blows open what you think you
Mm-hmm.
believe to be true. And it's I've been kind of in the background like the last couple of years, like eh, putting together a body of work around like the physical body and its own consciousness and its own sentience and wisdom. And to me, it's just bringing that piece in that, God, there's so much more to the multidimensionality of who we are, of our physical forms, and how our
Mm-hmm.
soul works through, or our energy or light bodies work through our physical body. That, it just feels like, yes, like there were options. And for whatever reason, we just kind of got to a point where like her physical body couldn't support like the energetic self. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's still something that's growing and evolving, but yeah, it's like on one hand, like this whole contract doesn't shift because there's like this high desire for her to come back. Like we want her back. I
Mm-hmm.
know like we'll, say this jokingly, like we'll ride again. Like
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
happen. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I work with people too, though, and it's like asking that question to the animals too. Like, a soul of one animal can show up in our life in a multitude of ways in different
Mm-hmm.
physical forms. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just makes me feel like everything is far more malleable than I
Mm-hmm.
believed it to be true before.
Yeah. Malleable and interconnected for sure.
Hmm.
I feel like I love the thought of like the understanding, I should say, of pieces of like souls or animals coming
Hmm.
back like I've experienced. I mean, I think I'm all but certain that Silas has parts of Bay in him because he's. I mean, from
Yeah.
the moment he came home, I'm like, oh yeah, hi buddy. Like he's.
Yeah.
I love all my animals, of course, but I like love this cat.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and like Riser definitely carries some pieces of Harley, and like you and I have
Yeah.
chatted about that before. Like how the pieces that from my perspective or kind of thought on it, it's the pieces that weren't done yet or that still
Yeah.
have something to kind of play out or give or contribute or whatever it is, they're going to come back in some form. Or sometimes
Yeah.
it's the whole spirit too, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, and just they get to come back and be like, okay, I'm going to do this again. And like Silas, I think he carries some of Bay. I think he also carries some of the cat that I had before him, Orion, who
Yeah.
I only had him for a year, and he was a sweet, sweet old guy. And they look almost
Yeah.
exactly the same, but it was
Yeah.
also that like there's just this feeling of when Silas came of like it almost felt like Orion wanted longer
Hmm.
here, so he came right back, as a young
Yeah.
cat instead of this old cat.
I love
Um,
it.
so yeah, it's just I mean I could talk about this stuff all day. The
Oh, I love it.
all the
It's
interconnections and stuff. Yeah.
I had well, my mare Tina passed away in 2022. But I remember shortly after I got her, and she was a rescue, um, she reminded me so much of a horse that I had had like through high school and college and
Mm,
chiropractic school. And I remember I was just like hand grazing her one day, and I was sort of like, God, there's so much of her that reminds me of Penny. And she kind of like again took me into this experience, or maybe he did, I don't know.
mhm.
But it was this idea of that, we can have animals that leave that left a tremendous mark on our life, and they can actually be like really profound spirit guides for us, and they can actually overlight an animal that's in our
Mm,
life and to flow an essence of who they are through the being of another animal, even though that animal remains like its own unique soul
yep.
signature, but they can flow aspects of them through us, which just feels like a massive extension of love,
Mm,
you know.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, at least that was my interpretation,
Yeah.
of what I was being shown. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, love is the crux of all of it, right?
yep,
It's the crux of the grief. It's the joy. It's the entire experience is
yeah,
anchored in that in love, right? And in that
yeah,
ultimate like
yeah.
connection. Um, and I love to like I want to touch briefly on you mentioned um gosh, I'm losing the word that you used, but the fairness of it all, right? And
Hmm.
and I'm right there with you. There can be so many circumstances where it doesn't feel fair,
Yeah,
and yet I think it like one of the fairest things that you found and did for her is
yeah,
letting her go, right? And not
yeah,
asking her to stay longer. And that I think separating that the unfairness of the situation and like having this kind of shock and trauma play out unexpectedly or
yeah,
even when it's expected, right? Is balanced in some ways by the fairness of having this option and like
hmm,
acting in that sense of
yeah,
I mean I'd say this often, it's the greatest act of unconditional love, right? To be
yep,
like, okay, you're like I see it, and it's only fair to let you leave this body.
yeah,
um but that's as with all of these things, that's a hard balance to feel and to find yourself in.
yeah. And I think it's such a human thing, um, to not allow ourselves to just settle into the trust
Mm,
of what feels right in that moment when it comes to death.
yes.
Um, and that's a really helpful thing for me too to view. Like, yes, like her, me deciding to let her go, I do feel like was a huge expression of love. Um, and I've never really viewed it as like it was also the most fair thing I could do for her.
Hmm.
One of the things that when I work with people, and it's really just helping them connect to their animals when they've passed on, there is this really common thing of like really worry over, did I do the right thing? And are my animals going to resent me for that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I know 100% to be true is once an animal, well, even when they're in their physical form, there is no guilt, shame, or judgment. Like it's just not something that an animal holds.
Mm.
And especially when they go non-physical, to me it's like it's always just been nothing but love. It's
Mm-hmm.
been nothing but love and gratitude and like high perspective. And so if anybody's listening to this, like I can tell you with 100% certainty, regardless of how an animal's shown up in your life, they're showing up there out of love. Even when it's
Absolutely.
challenging, it's a loving expression of like, can we grow you, stretch you, and expand you?
Mm-hmm.
Or can we highlight something in you that could be released? And I've just never come across an animal who's passed on who has held any sort of resentment over not being in a physical form anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a good reminder for me too, because it was the first place I went,
Mm-hmm.
in this experience was like grief and shame and like, oh my God, did I do the right thing? And so I think it's just a very common, very human experience. But what I can say with 100% certainty is your animals don't feel that at all.
Absolutely. And I think the circumstances, and this is also hard to remember, but the circumstances or the way that an animal dies, whether it's a nice, planned, peaceful or not, right,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't negate and doesn't erase the entirety of their life, whether it was short or
Yep.
long, right? Like it
Yep.
doesn't, that one, the one moment,
Mm-hmm.
however it plays out, doesn't doesn't erase what came before, right? And it
Yeah.
it doesn't weigh more than all that came before.
Yeah.
And that's having that perspective shift in the years since Bay died, since he's the most recent one. Like that took time, but as soon as I found that, it was rather freeing because, I mean, of course, grief will still play its way when it
Yep.
happens again, but
Mm-hmm.
having that perspective and like anchoring in, okay, it doesn't erase all that came before. And I think sometimes that can be a narrative that not necessarily that's said directly, but it
Mm-hmm.
can be like an energy that's kind of carried in our culture these days around death, right? Of like
Yeah.
so much focus on the death itself or the lack of that physical presence instead
Mm-hmm.
of, which again, of course, is hard, is heartbreaking, but it's not that's not the summation of the life and love that was lived and shared.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, like when you were talking, um, when I lost Tina, it'll be almost 3 years ago. Her everything leading up to her death was like a wildly different experience. I mean, I had had her purely just out of love. Like there was something magnificent about her. There was no expectation for her to need or be anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she had had a lot of old injuries and like, just chronic pain. And I went out to the barn one day and I just like, she looked at me and I'm like, okay, like we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was just such a different experience where I did get to plan with the vet. Like I had, about a day and a half with her. Everything felt very orchestrated and the grief was still really profound and deep. But one of the things that really came through with her passing is, grief is not something that I think is meant to isolate us. I don't think it's meant to be something where we seclude ourselves and go through, which I feel like a lot of people do,
Mm-hmm.
where it's sort of like, I'm going to kind of disconnect from society and then I'll reemerge when I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that as a judgment around that, but I feel like too, one of the beautiful aspects of grief is letting people come in and support you.
Yes.
And I feel like Tina's loss really told me, or showed me, I'm like, grief is meant to be a communal thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
meant to be supportive and to allow other people to hold you,
Mm-hmm.
um, even from a distance, just to
Mm-hmm.
support you. And I still feel like there's just a lot of shame around the process that I'm just grateful for you and for people doing this type of work, because I feel like the more we talk about it and share our experiences, the more we create this possibility for others to not be ashamed of what we feel or to be in judgment or to buffer against it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, I mean, like you spoke earlier, like it can be hard, I think, for some people to know how to show up for people,
Yep.
right? Or like how to
Hmm.
like, and whether it's because they want to kind of push it aside themselves, or it's just kind
Hmm.
of this feeling of, well, what do you even do? But I think, us humans can be great at overthinking things. And it's like
Yeah.
they could just like just start by just like checking in or just see how it's going,
Yeah.
right? And like just being like letting your presence be felt.
Yeah.
And
I think something as simple, because when I kind of look at some of my family and like sort of that buffering against it, yeah, I think, if I take away my personal feelings, what I really think the heart, like the essence is it triggers this deep feeling in somebody else. And I think people want to feel like they're doing the right thing.
mhm,
When I feel like even just a simple of like, I'm just thinking of you at this time.
yep.
It's just that little bit of like just a reaching out, or I'm so sorry for your loss, and I just want you to know I'm thinking about you, like, can mean the world.
Hmm.
And there's often not much more that's needed than that, other than to me, it's just an acknowledge of like, I see you, like, I
Yep.
see what you're going through,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
is really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to start winding down a bit, but
Yeah.
as we finish, I would love to invite you if there's a specific or even just, well, yeah, if there's a specific memory or story of Soonie, of Tina, of any, both of them that you'd like to share, just kind of help uh, lend a smile and kind of
Yeah.
bring their life essence forward as we've spoken of their deaths.
Yeah. I think with Suni, the biggest imprint that she left on this life was she was so abundantly joyful. And her message really to me, and I want to like share this because anybody who's listening who needs permission, but so much of her soul's message is how important it is for us to live outside the lines
Mm,
and to
mm,
not
I love that.
necessarily stay in a lane. It's like live in the full expression of who you are, like unapologetically. And one of the things I just always like, people would comment and like just being around her, she was such a happy dog. Like she would
Mm,
actually do like somersaults, and like she was just abundantly joyful and playful. And I certainly needed that reminder in my life. But in her passing, like there's been such a message of like, you need to live life outside the lines and
mm,
don't feel like you need to stay in a lane and be contained. We're all here to be a full expression of our being.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love
So,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean she definitely I never got to meet her in person, but I
Hmm.
definitely like she had a strong energy. I mean, I feel like I know her from
Yeah.
what you would share about her and, hearing about her when I was at your place. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, she was definitely a big energy girl.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
larger than life, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That's the
So,
brilliance of these guys.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. This has been amazing and incredible. I could just keep talking for hours and
I
hours and hours,
know.
but it's good.
I
That's
feel
good.
like it's such a like it's such an important thing to talk about too. But yeah, I've loved this conversation, and thank you so much for having me here. I really
Of
appreciate it.
course. It
Yeah.
certainly won't be the last one that we have. It's just
Yeah.
this is a good wrap up point for this type of conversation.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? And I'll
Yeah.
put stuff in show notes, but where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website, it's just my name. It's tracyrainwaters.com. For anyone, if you're interested in a soul channel session, you can find me there. And then I do teach classes on soul channeling and other avenues of my curiosities as it comes to all things spiritual and animals. And then I'm also on Instagram just at dr.rainwaters.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tracy.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll put my light in a bottle, something to guide your way.
This has been the Cosmic Heartline podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed what we talked about, if it resonated with you, please don't forget to rate, review, and share with friends. It really does help more people find these conversations, find Cosmic Heartline, and find this work that we're doing. For more information and to connect, go to www.cosmicheartline.com, on Instagram at cosmic_heartline, and Facebook at Cosmic Heartline. The Cosmic Heartline podcast is a production of Cosmic Heartline LLC, produced by Tora Troop. The music that you hear throughout this episode is More Than One Way to Go Home by Amherst. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.